So I want to welcome all of you to this wonderful webinar, and we'll be talking about kiln firing. We know that we can torch fire as well, but better not do it, yeah? If we want to sell our work, we need to be sure about the quality we are selling. So I am dedicating this webinar entirely to kiln firing. I've divided it in a few sections, and after I will be finishing a section, I will ask you to present your questions if you'll have some. If not, we'll just go and discuss the other section. So I asked all of you to write me the questions you have, and based on your questions, I divided the seminar in three sections. And the first will be about kiln and kiln programming. The second will be about firing methods, and the third will be about firing schedules. Let's say this scenario, you got a kiln, you got a new kiln or used kiln. What we'll do first? Having the kiln and being ready to fire our metal clay. We need to remember all the time 3 points. First one is safety. Always fire. Put the piece in the kiln when the kiln is cool and take it out when the kiln cool down. The second is read the instruction, because you need to know how to operate that kiln. And the third is always test fire. So if you sorry, if you got the kiln, I would recommend you to run it empty the first time and see if it holds the temperature and if it holds for the time you need to fire your metal clay. So let's say you want to fire fine silver, so run the kiln at 1650 for 2.5 hours and see how it holds the temperature. And second, what you'll do, you'll need to test fire metal clay itself. You cannot avoid and you cannot skip this step. In my tutorials, I'm showing how to make the strips for test firing. Hello, Missy, come on here. Sorry, my cat wants a cuddle. I am cutting my strips 4 cards thick and drying them completely before test firing, and placing a strip on the medium you are test firing on, and measuring the strip before placing it in the kiln, and after running the kiln for the temperature and for the time you need to sinter it. We are getting the strip from the kiln, and the first thing what we are doing, we are measuring it again, and having the measurements before firing and having the measurements after firing, what we are doing, we are calculating the shrinkage. So when test firing, the first thing we are looking for is shrinkage. Second, we are examining our strip, how it looks. Is it smooth, or does it have bubbles? If it has bubbles, what does it mean? It means or that the strip wasn't dry, or your kiln runs hot, or the temperature is too high and your metal melted. So here we are. We took the strip out, we measured it, and we determined that it shrinked. So the metal sintered. We see that the strip is smooth and nice, so everything is good. we didn't melt it, and the strip was dry before putting it in the kiln. The third step, we are determining the quality of the metal, because we cannot saw that strip and look under a microscope. What we will be doing, we'll be bending it, bending and unbending. So when firing metals, we are looking for a quality of the metal which can be comparable with the sheet metal which is formed under pressure. So if we are bending the strip one time and it snaps, it means that we need to increase the holding time. If we are bending the strip one time one way, unbending and bending it again, and it didn't snap, it's wonderful. So when determining the quality of the metal, we are looking to see how many times we can bend and upbend a strip. Usually we find silver and with sterling it works 2 times. With bronze, with alloys or copper, it can work much more many times. I'm bending and I'm bending bronze for about 6 times before snapping the strip. So this was test firing. Another possibility can be, if the quality of the metal is not acceptable, is that your kiln runs cold. And in this case, we'll be gradually increasing the temperature until we'll reach the melting point. If you test fired and you got the bubbles on your metal, the next test firing will be decreasing the temperature for about 10 to 25 degrees. So, making a recapitulation for this section, we need to remember 3 things about using a kiln. First, always safety. Second, read the instruction for the kiln and see how to operate it. And third, test firing. No matter what you are sintering in your kiln, you need to test fire. You need to know, is your kiln running hot, is your kiln or running cold, and you need to see what you are sintering to determine the shrinkage, because it can be that on the packet is a different number in comparison what you'll get in reality. Does anybody have any questions about kiln, about safety, and about test firing? April is asking how often I test fire. Depending what I'm sintering, April. If I am test firing, if I'm going to sinter precious metals, I'm test firing just once, because precious metals are very predictable. If I'm sintering alloys, and I am talking about alloys which contain more than 5% copper, about sterling silver 925, I will be test firing every time I am putting a masterpiece in the kiln. This means that I will be placing in the kiln the masterpiece and the test strip. So I can check the test strip before taking out the masterpiece. If I am firing base metals, the same. I am test firing every time I am sintering base metals, masterpieces. Because next what we'll be discussing, it will be firing methods. And in order, April is writing. So I have test fired silver once, and several packages later I have no issues. So not necessary to test fire again. April, I would give you an advice. If you are using silver which is manufactured by big companies, let's say Mitsubishi, which manufactures PMC, I don't think we need to test fire repeatedly, to repeat test fire, because they are very consistent about their metal clay. But if you are firing metal clay from small manufacturers, and you need to test fire every batch, because according to my experience, I had some interesting results when test firing easy. One batch was good and another batch just didn't turn out. So better test firing every batch you are getting from small manufacturers. Debbie is saying, so if the test strip does not pass, then you refire the masterpiece. Yes, Debbie, I am placing a new test strip and refiring the masterpiece. April says thank you. You are very welcome. So talking about firing methods, we'll divide this section in two, because we need to talk about how to fire precious metals which are exposed during firing. It's okay. And how to fire alloys and base metals which we are firing in carbon. Yeah. So we know that we don't need air isolation when firing precious metals. They are not oxidizing. And we are firing them air exposed. You can fire on different, using different support. My favorite support is to use a crucible for melting and to fill it with alumina hydrate. As a wonderful support works vermiculite as well. I just don't like it because it pits the pieces. You can see the pitting on the back of the pieces, and it takes lots of refining afterwards. Another support for firing is a shelf. I like it very much for flat pieces, but if you have, let's say, a pendant with a bail underneath, with a curved bail, you cannot fire it on a shelf. You need a support like alumina hydrate or vermiculite. There are also, as a wonderful support medium can be the glass, fiberglass blanket. It works very well. Just don't try to sinter easy on fiberglass because it degrades the metal clay. So when firing precious metal, and it doesn't matter what it is, it's gold or it's silver, we can fire it exposed. There is just one exception: we want to fire precious metals in carbon, and that's when we are firing stones in. Yeah, in order the stones not to change the color, we'll be firing them in carbon. Talking about alloys, and I'm talking about alloys which contains more than 5% copper. So silver, sterling silver, which is 95 or 96% silver, we can still fire exposed. If we are starting firing silver which has more than 6% copper, we need to fire it at least in two phases. And the first phase will be the burn-off phase, which will be air exposed. The second phase will be the carbon phase. And the same applies to all base metals. Why? Because if we have more than 5% copper in our alloy, the alloy will oxidize. You'll get ashes out of your kiln. So when firing base metals or alloys, we need to remember that we have two phases. And the first phase is air exposed or burn-off phase, and the maximum length, according to my experience, it should be 1 hour. For very thick pieces is 1 hour. I am extending this phase from 30 minutes to 1 hour. When firing air exposed, you don't need to use every time steel mesh as recommended by the manufacturers. You can just place your piece on the carbon. Just keep in mind that the temperatures for the first phase are always less than 1000 Fahrenheit. Why? Because at 1000 Fahrenheit, the carbon will take fire. You'll not burn off the binders from underneath the piece. Yeah. So first phase, always air exposed, always the temperatures less than 1000 Fahrenheit. Second phase, my preference after the first phase is to kiln completely the kiln to the room temperature and after proceed with the second phase. So after firing our piece, first phase in a stainless steel container, yeah, with the carbon, the piece and the test piece on the top of carbon, what we are doing, we are cooling the kiln to room temperature, taking it out and gently pouring carbon on the top of our masterpiece and test piece, and proceeding with the sintering phase. This applies to sterling silver 925 and to all base metals. It's pretty predictable to sinter sterling silver. Just a second, Constance. It's predictable to sinter sterling silver, and we know that the sintering phase should be about 2-3 hours. I would suggest to you to experiment with base metals, because usually the manufacturers are writing that you can sinter it in 40 minutes or 1 hour. But if you'll test fire and you'll determine the quality of your strip after test firing, you'll see that if increasing the temperature to 4 hours or 4 hours and a half, the result will be very different. You'll get an awesome quality of the metal. So, according to my experience, I'm proceeding firing sterling. First phase burn off about half an hour, second phase about 2 hours, 2 hours and a half, depending on the brand of sterling silver I'm using. Base metals, I am extending the burn off phase to about 1 hour, and I'm extending the sintering phase to about 4 hours and a half to 5 hours. If somebody has questions about sintering, about firing methods, I think I need to talk a little bit about carbon as well, and a little bit about test firing every time you are firing base metals masterpieces. And I will do it after a second, after I will read what Constance wrote. What happens if you do not allow the kiln to cool after the burn-off phase? You are exposing yourself to risk you don't need to expose to, Constance. because you can burn yourself, and I don't think that's necessary. Better letting it cool down and after proceeding with the sintering phase. I had somebody during a workshop asking me what it will happen if they will be firing fine silver and alumina hydrate and will not let the kiln cool down. I recommend you to cool down the kiln every time you are firing something, because from alumina hydrate or from vermiculite you can get some nasty burns. And my recommendation here is, if you don't want to cool down the kiln and you are eager to process, just call 911 and after open the kiln. Yeah, you'll be safe. The kiln, April says, the kiln can crack if you open it too soon. Mine did. Yeah, it's better the kiln to crack than you to get burns.
It's a good point.
But it's a good point indeed. Yeah. When the firing is complete, I'm opening the kiln just 1 centimeter to the process of cooling down, to speed up the process of cooling down, but that's it. Not touching crucibles, not touching stainless steel containers. I said I need to tell you that it's easy to fire precious metals. It's pretty easy to fire sterling silver, but when firing base metals, I can say insist. Test fire a strip every time you are putting a masterpiece on, because with the variation in the atmospheric pressure, your kiln will behave differently. And one time you can get out a sintered piece, and other times the piece will not sinter because it's not predictable. This applies to bronze, and much more this applies to copper. Another word is that the most difficult to sinter is copper, because you would need to run the kiln very close to the melting temperature of copper, which is about 2000 Fahrenheit. Yeah. And copper has a tendency to sinter on the surface and not to sinter inside in the depth at the piece. So you need to be very careful when test firing copper, and you need to be careful when firing your copper masterpiece. Another thing copper has a tendency to do is to crack. So be ready to repair the piece and to refire it. Somebody wrote, would you please talk more about firing silver with stones? I'm not a big fan of firing stones, because I still think no matter what it's written on the internet, or I think the stones are degrading. But for sure you can fire if the hardness of the stone on the MOF scale is more than 8, or if you are firing synthetic stones, you can kiln fire them. And the procedure would be to place the piece on the carbon, piece which contains stones, on the carbon, and to run a burn off phase for about half an hour, and after to put the carbon on the top and to carbon fire it for the rest of the time. So let's say if you are firing stones in fine silver, run the burn off phase at 1650 for half an hour, cool the kiln down, and put the carbon on the top, and run it for another 2 hours for the sintering phase. Does Accent Jewels is asking, does it applies to CZ as well, to cubic zirconia? Yes, it applies to cubic zirconia. Any stones which are colorful, usually blues and greens are changing colors if to fire them exposed. So that's why we are firing them in carbon. Debbie is asking, I'm so new at this. What is this carbon? So, Debbie, we are using carbon, coconut activated carbon to fire base metals in order to isolate them from air, because base metals when exposed to high temperature and to oxygen are oxidizing. So when dipping the piece in coconut activated carbon and heating the kiln more than 1000 degrees Fahrenheit, the carbon is taking fire and is forming like a muffle, a fire around the masterpiece, or the piece you are firing in. And the air cannot penetrate the fire, so the reaction of oxidization doesn't happen. Nice to see you, Eugenia. Eugenia is asking, is there a particular brand of carbon you can recommend? I'm not sure about that. So for firing my pieces, I am buying coconut activated carbon, and I am buying it from Rio Grande because I'm used to do it. I wouldn't recommend you to use the acid washed one, because it needs one more step in preparation. You'll need to fire it for half an hour before proceeding firing metal clay in it. Yes, carbon is reusable. You'll need to sieve it after each firing to remove the ashes. And mediums containers to fire base metals or sterling silver. One option is the stainless steel container, and I am buying them from kitchen restaurant supplies stores, because they come like 3 or 4 times more expensive on the metal clay sides. And another type of container to fire in would be the magic foil from Cool Tools. They have a very specific foil which you are folding. Oh, thank you. The foil which you are folding and making this container. It's a wonderful foil, but I recommend you to fire only bronze or sterling using this foil, because it disintegrates at high temperatures. If you'll try to fire copper in this foil, you'll disintegrate it after first firing. My husband just reminded me to point you. So when firing base metals or sterling silver or whatever, you need a lid with a slit, a vented lid, because you still need a little bit of air, the sintering process to occur. So these were firing, and we learned that it's we are talking about 2 firing methods: the air exposed for precious metals and carbon firing for base metals or alloys. When firing air exposed, we can use different mediums for support. We can use alumina hydrate in a crucible or vermiculite in a crucible. We can use shelves. We can use fiberglass blanket. Just remember that when test firing, you need to test fire for the support medium as well, because a crucible needs heat. Do you understand? You might need to adjust the temperature at the kiln when using a crucible. Talking firing alloys and base metals, we are talking about carbon firing. And we learned that the best carbon is the coconut activated one, and best containers to use are the stainless steel one. If to fire for 1 year every day base metals in one of these containers, it will disintegrate. We learn that we need to clean the carbon after each firing by sieving it. And when firing base metals or alloys, we need to test fire strip every time we are putting a masterpiece in the kiln. Eugenia is writing, I never tried firing with carbon. Please talk more about sieving. Eugenia, sieving. I'm sieve the carbon after each fire and using a sieve for pasta, or a small sieve for tea. So why we are doing this? Because sorry for that. Why we are doing this? Because the carbon will take fire and form the muffle, but the ashes will not. Another thing is that you'll have ashes from the lid and from the container itself, which can deform your piece. Yeah, so we need to clean it every time after firing. Anyway, we are aiming for the best we can get from metal clay. But we need to remember that anyway, our metal will be more porous than the metal which is formed under pressure. Yeah, under high pressure. Constance is writing, Rodi, I have issues with my firing schedules. I think because I'm at high altitude. I live at 7,200 feet. Any suggestion on how I should adjust for this? Yes, Constance, you need to test fire. I think your kiln is running hotter than at low altitude, but I'm not sure about that. You need to test fire, and you need to use a test firing log, because I know that at high altitudes the atmospheric pressure is changing more often. Debbie, do you put a lid on the container inside the kiln? Debbie, I am putting the lid only during the sintering phase, the second phase. So the first phase, the burn-off phase, I'm firing without a lid. Second phase, I'm putting the lid on. Rochelle is asking, can PMC be attached to a sheet silver in the kiln? To a fine silver sheet, yes. Not to a sterling one. You'll need to solder to a sterling. Third, it was about firing schedules, and we talked a little about it, but let's remember some crucial points. So no matter what's written on the package or on the instruction, we know that fine silver, the perfect firing schedule is 1650 Fahrenheit for 2.5 hours. If you are firing embedded glass or embedded stones, you'll need to diminish the temperature and the holding time. And you know, it's a trade-off, yeah? You'll fire that stone in, but you'll not get the quality, the optimal quality of metal clay. It will look pretty, you can wear it, but be careful if you try to sell the work you are doing. Better firing and getting optimal quality of the metal clay. That was fine precious metals, and we are talking gold and fine silver, and we remember that it's very easy to sinter and it's predictable. And a few moments, let's say such a scenario. If you are starting firing precious metals and you need to leave home and you need to turn the kiln off and you fired it for just an hour, what you can do? You are just turning the kiln off and you are coming back home and refiring for another 1.5 hours. Yeah? But this works only with precious metals. It doesn't work with base metals because base metals have a tendency to crack if to do this trick. So we said the easiest to fire is precious metals. A little more difficult are alloys. It's not difficult to fire silver 960 on sorry, or 950 because we are firing it air exposed and we don't need carbon and it doesn't have a tendency to crack. But when the percent of carbon is more than 5%, we are proceeding with carbon firing. Yeah. And carbon firing, we are talking about two phases. The burn-off phase, which can be up to 1 hour, and the sintering phase. What else I can tell you about firing schedules besides firing base metals, extend the sintering phase, and always keep a firing log, because I don't know at your location, but here when the atmospheric pressure changes, I'm changing the sintering temperatures for base metals. So in summer I have the sintering temperatures 25 degrees higher than in winter. JB is writing, for fine silver you said the kiln needs to be at 1650 and then you hold the temperature for 2.5 hours. Yes, for all fine silver, no matter what brand you are purchasing, the optimal temperature is 1650 and the optimal holding time is 2.5 hours. April, I'm using PMC1 fire and just got some gold accent. Could you talk about the best way to do this? April, you don't need to do anything on PMC1 fire if you want to apply gold. Just apply on it. It will work perfectly. If you want to be very precautious about it, you'll need to gild deplete before applying the gold, but I am not. I found that on PMC1 fire works without gild depleting. So fire the metal and after add the gold, the paste. Did you get the paste or the foil? Add the paste and the foil and proceed with firing or with torch firing and sintering it. Then I apply. No, April. First, you are sintering the sterling. You got the sterling on fire, taking it from the kiln, applying the gold and putting in the kiln or torch firing. Good. DB is asking the temperatures. DB is asking the temperature and holding time for sterling. DB usually depends on the brand you are using, but usually the perfect temperature for sterling is 1600. It's just about 50 degrees less than for fine silver, and the holding time is 2 hours. I want to tell you a trick about PMC, because we have PMC 3, PMC plus, PMC 1 fire. So my experience is that you can combine all three of them and fire at the same temperature. And I'm firing them at 1650 for 2 hours and a half. Even PMC one fire, the sterling one. So if you need a piece with more support, you can use as a base the PMC one fire and apply the embellishments from PMC plus or PMC free, and fire at the temperatures of fine silver. It works. Gina is asking, when buying a kiln, what accessories I purchase with it? You'll get on the kiln a plug. You need it for sure. I would recommend, if you are making flat pieces, to get the shelf. It's very useful. And if you want to fire base metals, get a stainless steel container. According to my experience, usually you can buy the shelf and they are coming like with a small feet. I think they are useless. You don't need that. Just a second, I will get to the chat. Eugenia is asking, what is the firing schedule for gold accents? Depending on the brand. I think Aura 22 fires at 1200 Fahrenheit, but I'm not sure. Could be 1000 or 1200. Need to read the instruction. My preference is not to fire the gold accents in the kiln, but to torch fire them. And now I am working on a tutorial. You can see what a mess I have on my working bench. I'm working on a tutorial how to apply the gold accents, so I will share how to easily do it. I think it's a little bit excessive. It's like an overkill to sinter the gold accents in a kiln, just consuming too much electricity. You can do it, you can heat that piece for 2 minutes with a torch and sinter the gold on the top of silver. Gina says thank you. And I had a couple of questions I think I missed, because my husband Steve helped and put them on the paper. Refiring to add embellishments. Can you refire a piece? You can refire a piece as many times as you want. So for precious metals, there is no limit for how many times you can fire it. It will not degrade. Be careful when refiring base metals. Don't go more than 5-6 firings, because no matter how good is the carbon you are using, the metal will oxidize in time. Yeah, you'll degrade it. Repairing cracks. How we are repairing cracks? When we are getting cracks? It's almost impossible to get cracks when firing precious metals. It's very possible to get cracks when firing base metals And so when firing sterling, if you didn't have a good connection when forming a piece in sterling, you'll get a crack there. So what we are doing, we are taking the piece out of the kiln, we are repairing it with green ware, with metal clay, and we are firing it 2 phases again. The burn-off phase, we cannot skip that, and we are firing the sintering phase. Yeah. And putting a test strip in the stainless steel container with it. April is writing. Do you combine the PMC 3 and 1.5 because the fine silver is shining? Does it shrink different rates on fire? Does this cause problems with the piece? Yes, I'm combining PMC 3 and PMC plus with PMC 1.5 when I want harder metal for the base. I can do it in pendants, and I am doing it in rings, and I can do it in bracelets. Does it shrink different? PMC, no. This brand particular, no. I didn't have my pieces deformed. And that's amazing because they have a different shrinkage rate. You know that PMC 1.5 is 20%, and PMC 3 and PMC plus is 12%, but they didn't deform. And I'm using this trick a lot. Debbie, it was helpful for you. I'm glad it was helpful for you. Rochelle, thank you so much too for coming. Gina, which of your tutorials do you recommend for a beginner? Gina, I have 2 complete tutorials, which is Sky Guide 3 and Sky Guide 5. And I recommend you to start with either of them. It's a big work to do it, and you cannot do it in 1 hour, but they are complete, they contain videos, and they are very helpful if you want to learn everything about metal clay. And then you can proceed with step guides. The step guides are step by step and are more focused on design aspects than on basic metal clay knowledge. So I want to say thank you for coming, thank you for listening, and let's repeat the 3 points. I know I am acting as a parrot, but this is for your safety. So when having a kiln, what we are doing, we are reading the instruction first. Second, what we are doing, we are staying safe. And third, we are test firing. I recommend you to test fire everything, to test fire precious metals, to test fire base metals, and every time you are proceeding with firing a base metals masterpiece, test fire strip as well. At the end of this webinar, and I think it will be in 1 week time, you'll get directions, how they call it? A guide for firing and test firing. Thank you everyone. It was such a pleasure to talk about firing with you. And I hope everybody is well and will get to see each other in reality. Because I basically just felt your presence. I couldn't see you, which I hope so much to see you during this webinar. Thank you so much, and bye.